All right, so in slide number 16, it is talking about how um, the pH of semen. Now, I haven't even mentioned semen yet. We had said that the primary sex organ in the male is the testes, and we had said, what is the job of the testes? It's to produce gametes, the sperm cells. And yet, when I was talking about breeding my horse, I didn't say, I would get shipments of sperm. You don't say it that way. You say semen. So, what is semen? Well, semen, it ends up, and you'll see when we are looking at the development of the sperm cell goes from a regular cell with a lot of cytoplasm, all of that stuff, down to essentially a nucleus and a tail. A nucleus, a midpiece, and a tail. And so it loses all of the machinery that is necessary for basically survival, for care for itself. And so in the male reproductive system, we have these other accessory structures that I mentioned, the epididymis, the seminal vesicles, and the prostate. And those three structures are going to be producing semen. And semen is the fluid that the sperm cells are in, that is deposited at the top of the vagina in the female, just below the uterus there. So on slide 16, it says that semen has a high pH. That means alkaline, right? And we had said because of bacteria, that the vagina, the female reproductive tract, has a low pH, it's acidic. And so semen has a high pH in that fluid in order to counteract the acidity that is found in the female reproductive tract. All right, so when we talk about reproduction, we have to talk about the sperm cells, and it ends up, if without being in the semen and in the female reproductive tract, the sperm cells aren't even capable of fertilizing an egg. They have to be activated, basically, and this is called capacitation. Now, years ago, I was working as a marine biologist, and I was studying a marine worm. It's a marine worm called Paraprionospioponata. Huge, very complicated name. But it was a marine worm, and many aquatic organisms, if you think about salmon spawning in the river, they don't have internal fertilization, they have external fertilization. And so the semen is deposited in the external environment. Well, it ends up that I was working with these worms, and you could tell the females from the males, and I was doing an ecological study, and so I was trying to figure out how many eggs there were. And so I would find these very green marine worms. They live in the ocean. And when they were green, they were full of eggs. And so I was counting the number of eggs that were in the females. And then I would find the males, of course, also. And so I was looking at the literature, just kind of playing around, really. And I found that a discussion of how you could artificially fertilize eggs, and it talked about how you had to wash the semen first. And this is this capacitation. They said if you don't do it, you will not be successful. And I did it, and it ends up there's a way you can tell if an egg has been fertilized. It has this extra membrane that pops up on it. It's called the fertilization membrane. And I have some beautiful photographs of Paraprionospioponata eggs that have been fertilized under the microscope. So anyway, that's capacitation. That's what I'm talking about. Now, we had said that in theory, that you have a 2-day window, and I said that my experience with artificial insemination, it's not true, but maybe in humans it is, because the sperm cells can live in the female reproductive tract for about 48 hours. So, and we had said you have literally millions of them, but they have to make their way to the egg. And so by the time they make their way to the oocyte in the oviduct, there's only about 100 of them that find their way to the egg, but only one is able to fertilize the egg because of that fertilization membrane. As soon as one sperm cell penetrates the cell membrane of the oocyte, this thing called the fertilization membrane raises up and prevents all others from entering into the egg. Okay, let's start on the male reproductive system. So this is going to be slide 18. So in slide 18, we had said the primary sex organ in a male is the testes. And then we had these other structures, the epididymis, the vas deferens, the seminal vesicle, the prostate, and then something that we talked about in lab, but we didn't even see, the bulbourethral gland. Now, during sex, the urethra, and remember when we were talking about the urethra and we were talking about acid-base balance and we were talking about the kidneys, and we said that is the way that you can get rid of excess hydrogen ions is through the urine. So that means that the urethra has a lot of acidity in it. So that bulbourethral gland, early on in sex, it starts to secrete its secretion, and what it's for is to neutralize the acidity that is remaining within the urethra. Because remember, the vas deferens from the testes that are going to be carrying the sperm cells during sex ejaculation, they are going to enter into the urethra in the prostate, right? So we had said we have prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and spongy urethra. So what's going to happen is the organ, the glands, the other three glands, the epididymis, which is where sperm cells are stored, but it also is going to produce some of the seminal fluid. The seminal vesicles and the prostate, they're all going to be contributing to this fluid that is going to be carrying the sperm cells. So what we're looking at is you can see all of that on this diagram of the male reproductive system. Okay, so let's move down to slide 19. So slide 19, it's talking about that hormone that Manny Ramirez and Jose Canseco and so many others have abused. It's testosterone. And so why would you abuse it? Maybe it's because you want more body hair. No, but that is an effect. That is an effect. Also, maybe you wanted a deeper voice. Not likely to be the case. Thicker skin? Maybe. Increased muscle growth. That's why they do it. And thickening and strengthening of bones. So if you are an athlete, these two characteristics, the thickening and strengthening of the bones and the increase in muscles, this would be what they're after. Now, these other effects are there as well. So those are effects of testosterone. Now, I said, you may not even remember it, I said when we were that you start out female, right? And then at about 7 weeks after fertilization and implanting in the uterus, all of that, at that point, the baby starts to secrete, if it's a boy, starts to secrete testosterone. And it changes everything. We had said, where are the gonads located? Up in the abdomen. We had said you start out in a female model, and then you get converted into the male. So those what would have been ovaries that are now going to be testes, what do? They have to get down to a different location, right? Down to the scrotum, outside of the body. So if we look at slide 20, you can see the descent of the testes. So if you are a boy or a pediatrician or whatever, one of the things they monitor as you're growing up is whether or not your testicles have descended. And how do they descend? Well, there's something called the inguinal canals. And so up there where they start out, they have to make their way down through the inguinal canals. Now, what makes them move down through there? The gubernaculum. That's what they call it. It is a cord-like structure that aids in the movement of the testes from their position up in the abdomen down into the scrotum through the inguinal canal. I said, as a boy growing up, the doctors are going to be monitoring for this. And occasionally a testy doesn't make it all the way down. And this is sad because it will affect the amount of testosterone that is produced and the ability of that individual to have babies. And an individual that has undescended testes, or at least one, is called a cryptorchid individual. And it's written here on this slide. So on slide 20. I'm going to stop right here and we'll pick up slide 21 next.